So it's my great pleasure to introduce a new format on IWI. And for those who are seeing this clip on Silicon Curtain, you may not be aware that we've produced a new channel. It's designed to tackle Russian weaponized information and all its different formats and manifestations. It's a creator community. So you'll see not just sort of this strand we're going to create, but you'll see many other creators whose purpose it is to debunk and tackle weaponized Russian information. In fact, not just Russian, but any kind of authoritarian manipulation and information. This stream, tentatively, we're going to call it an emotional Ukrainian, because so many Ukrainians, especially women, seem to get labeled that way in academia and the media as a way, I think, of diminishing their agency, diminishing the impact of their views. And I have to say, more often than not, their views are far more sound, far more robust, far more rational than many so-called experts who are non-Ukrainian. Well, let's jump into this. I'm delighted to introduce you to Lesia Dubeno, who is going to be leading this strand. And yes, the very epitome of an emotional Ukrainian. But I'll ask you to introduce yourself, your work, so the audience is familiar with that. And then we're going to dive into what hopefully will be a far more conversational, slightly irreverent format, which looks at the week's news.
So thank you for having me, and thank you for saying that I epitomize that. I'm very flattered. I'm very flattered, and that's good. So a little bit about myself. I'm a journalist and analyst. I've been featured in the Financial Times, Political Europe, the Washington Times, many outlets. I also authored quite a few analytical reports, privately and publicly. But most of the time, what I do is I basically run my social media handles. I have my Substack, so you're free to subscribe if you want. And generally, right now, I'm focused on Ukraine and Russia, and Ukraine winning, or at least Ukraine getting a good deal. That's also something that I'm interested in. And yeah, so I studied in Sweden. I have a degree in European affairs, and here I am.
One of the big topics we're going to look at this week is, of course, Mr. Carlson going to Moscow once again. But let's start actually with a bigger concept of perhaps why he's been sort of called back to, the source of this propagandistic method, which he clearly admires so much. And that seems to be that a whole range of sort of foreign policy dominoes are tumbling. Russia obviously has pinned a lot of its foreign policy success on Syria and supporting the Assad regime, using that as a kind of springboard, and the port of Tartus and various other facilities as a springboard for its influence in the Middle East and indeed around the world. That's crumbling. They tried to overturn the Moldova election. That hasn't worked. They've tried to manipulate the Romanian election, and it now seems that that is going off the rails as well. And of course, we have Georgia Dream looking, I won't say fragile at this point, but certainly they haven't had an outright win in Georgia. Why and how is this all going so wrong for Putin?
Well, let's start with Carlson. And I think the reason why he's summoned is because the first interview wasn't bad enough. It wasn't embarrassing enough. So he was summoned for the second time. And it seems to me, I haven't watched the one with Lavrov, but I would assume that Lavrov is more well-spoken. At least he's a diplomat, even though he's a very aggressive diplomat, but at least, he's well-spoken compared to Putin, who was just, I don't even know what that was. I mean, all the jokes and memes after, I'm sure you remember Austin Powers and that monologue about Boulanger father and everything is like a penchant for buggery. And it was exactly the kind of monologue that we saw. And I think one of the reasons also why he was summoned is because that interview, in my opinion, despite Russian propaganda claiming it was a success, it wasn't a success. Even among the far right people, maybe a few were impressed, but ultimately it looked like you're dealing with a complete idiot, in the sense a complete idiot that that you can't really take seriously. Because when a person answers this way and starts to talk about historical things which are completely unrelated, then there's something wrong in his head, right? There's a lot of things wrong in his head. So I think that's one of the reasons. And also, as you rightly pointed out, what's happening worldwide is both good news for Putin and not so good news for Putin, because the Syria kind of scenario, I don't know whether they saw it coming. I don't sit in the Kremlin, but I would just generally assume that, knowing the situation in the Middle East and how it's unfolding, that they might have expected something like that. To this degree or not, I'm not sure. And again, I don't know exactly how it happened, the rebels, attacking. But again, I would assume, this is just an assumption, is that it probably has something to do with Israel. So somebody helped, somebody helped there, because it was just way too good. Like beeper operation good. So it just feels that way. I mean, obviously I don't have.
I mean, Turkey's been fingered potentially because
Yeah.
what we're seeing is an extraordinary, not just a sort of unfolding of a strategic plan. This isn't just sort of, you don't just randomly start taking this much territory. I mean, Russia has lost hundreds of thousands of troops to take less territory in Donbass over the last 12 months. So this doesn't happen by accident. And you also, from what I can tell, you've already got a proto police force, rolled out in Aleppo. So clearly, there's a lot of thought and planning that's gone into this, not just sort of, training in certain military techniques, but in the follow-up of how you sort of impose some kind of order. So yeah, absolutely. I mean, that scale of planning should be noticed. I wonder whether, the US were keeping an eye on that. I wonder whether this has completely passed the Russians by. I mean, maybe they thought just by like bombing hospitals, that would
Well,
be
it's their
enough.
favorite thing to do. So, I mean, it's when it comes to military strategy, it's the hospitals that matter the most. But it's also actually strategy. It's part of intimidating your adversary, right? Your enemy, which makes sense from their perspective, obviously. But what I'm trying to say here is that, like you rightly noted, that there's a lot of planning going on. And I don't believe in coincidences, especially in the Middle East, where there are so many conflicted interests and everybody's helping. Like today, Turkey and Israel are at odds, tomorrow they're friends, and so on. It's just like there's no way. And plus, I talked to some Israeli politicians, and they were super angry about Russia. So I wouldn't be surprised. But again, this is not like something, this is just a hypothesis, but I believe that it's not completely unfounded. So that's one thing. And the second thing is that Russian military power, I still don't understand what exactly that is. So when we talk about it and worldwide, what the hell is it? Private groups like Wagner? I mean, okay, are they that good? Probably not. We've already seen that in Mali, if I'm not
Yeah,
mistaken.
evidence shows they're not good at all.
They're
They're good
not good at
against
all.
civilians and unarmed people. Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because, Wagner, they use terror tactics, absolutely terror, intimidation, and so on. They use extreme violence. They're quite happy to partner up with the worst of the worst people wherever they operate. So, they'll advance into a vacuum through the use of terror, criminality, and of course manipulation of media, because in speaking to a former BBC correspondent for Sahel, it does seem that also in that region there is a huge investment in radio propaganda, in local newspapers, local networks, social media. So they create this aura of invincibility. They create the illusion on the one hand that they're there to help and it's a positive, but on the same time, that message is delivered with an implicit threat that, right, even if the reality you're experiencing doesn't really ladder up to the idea we're improving your lives, and this is what we'll do to you. So you've got the sort of carrot and stick all, merged together in this nasty little propagandistic package. And the sweetness, the way this bitter pill is sold to people is by saying, well, at least we're not the West, at least we're not the colonialists, while they busy go around ravaging, raping, killing, torturing, and extracting the mineral resources and wealth of the country they operate in, which is the very definition of the most rapacious kind of imperialism. That's the impression I get. But this only works if you're not resisted by someone, it seems, who is half competent.
You rightly noted that when it comes to propaganda, they do a lot and they're good at it. In fact, this made me recall a line I rewatched recently, The Spy with Sacha Baron Cohen, right? About Ellie Cohen. And there was this, so when he goes to Damascus, pretending to be the Syrian guy, I forgot his name, right? And he makes friends with local whatever well, nephew of some general, and they talk about military affairs and all about like Syrian successes and so on. And he says, if only we were as good on the battlefield as on the radio, right? So this is exactly what more or less Russia is. It's very good when it comes to propaganda. Now that it mastered, if that's a military, like if that's a weapon, for sure, they're good at it. They're good at it because they use a lot of different, yet very simple, but different conflicted messages that cater to every audience. And, they know exactly what you want to hear and they produce a message accordingly. So this is why they're so good at it. And this is probably their only like true military power, because outside of it, if you look at the weapons that they have and everything and missiles, and it's like, okay, maybe I'm wrong, but it feels like I'm right, because you just look at all these things. These are very simplistic kind of technology. It's simple technology, it's simple, Soviet simple technology. It can be effective, it can be not so effective. It's destructive for sure, but it doesn't mean that it's like super effective. This high precision weapon of some sort, Iron Dome. It's not Iron Dome. It's like you literally just fire like whatever. Okay, if you manage to down something, great. If not, then propaganda will fix it for you. But what I'm trying to say is that really I don't understand why people are so focused on this kind of Russian military power, especially abroad. It crumbles all the time. So if you take the Hamas attack also, which was definitely 100%, okay, 99.99999%, it was facilitated by Russia and Iran. So if you look at it, how did it work out? How did it work out? It worked out badly. I mean, Gaza is destroyed. Hamas at some point will be destroyed fully too. So if that was your goal, okay, well you did very well. I mean, what's the deal? The same with Hezbollah. So taking out all the leadership of Hezbollah, that's probably wasn't really their plan. I'm not so like 100% sure that they wanted Israel to kill every Hezbollah general or so. So
Well, it's a lack of imagination, isn't it? I mean, let's face it, none of us saw it coming that beepers would be able to take out, almost all their leading, activists and figures. I guess no one quite saw that coming. But I find that absolutely fascinating. It's the difference between strategic planning, the willingness to exert force, the willingness to defend the values you stand for. And this isn't me judging the right or wrong of the scenario, but it's Israel saying these are our interests and we are not going to pull our punches in defending them. But also there's a huge amount of strategic planning that goes on there. And this seems to me something the Russians do not do. I mean, you and I know why they don't do that. The level of trust in society is low. The sense of exceptionalism, the sense of unique entitlement that Russian culture has means that, well, if you have that, well, why do you need to strategically plan? I mean, I think the whole society is not geared to long-term strategic planning and cooperation. But Israel clearly is. Now, they could have set those beepers off at any time. They may never have set them off if the circumstances didn't arise. But the idea that you sort of create that capability and you have a level of tolerance for, Hezbollah BS and the rockets coming over, and you put up with that maybe for a couple of years, like you haven't reached the critical threshold where that network is suddenly going to become necessary. But the level of planning is unbelievable that goes into that. We don't see anything like that from the Russian side, but they're very good at expanding into a
I'm sorry, I'm
vacuum.
just gonna butt in. I'm just you'll never see anything like that because this is not how the Slavic mentality works. So Slavs do not plan long term. This is out of the question. Okay, it has to be like, it's most of the times it looks pretty much like this. You get drunk, wake up drunk, and that's when you make the decision. And it's these hangover decisions when you get super angry and you start doing something. And it's never about long-term planning, because long-term planning requires you to have certain well, characteristics, right, to do that. And it's just not what the Slavs do. And so it's never gonna happen. So it's something China can do. Yeah, that for sure. That's something in their kind of like, it corresponds to their mindset, but definitely not the Russians. And I would actually, sorry to
I'll
say,
argue there is something they do
Ukrainians are not
invest
that
in.
good at that either. So
But there is something, again, coming back to information, there is one area where they do invest long term because you can see a consistent line from, I mean, let's not go to the Tsarist period, but let's start at least in 1920s. There's a consistent investment in, I would call it, coercive manipulation or coercive control. And that is consistent. And it's very, very simple. It's building the idea that Russian cannot be beaten, that Russia is a superpower, that Russia is exceptional, and it should be feared. So I think they are prepared to invest long term, because that's such a simple idea. It doesn't matter how complex the mechanic is that you use to invest in it. The idea is kind of so simple and requires a very low threshold of trust within Russian society. They can all still get behind that form of propaganda. But that seems to me, they've spent many, many decades in investing in that kind of persona as a state.
yeah, but it's not really about long-term planning. It's just they saw that it was effective. So and I don't think that it's about like long term. They see it's effective, they invest. They find new ways. They definitely analyze audiences. So when it comes to communication and so on, they do a better job than the West and a lot of governments, because a lot of their messages are very emotional to begin with, right? None of their messages are facts. So these are emotions, pure emotions, and they cater to each group, which is dissatisfied. This is why, like, I brought this up during our previous interviews and so on. But when you see a problem in the West, and even if you find some Russian connections, I really discourage you from saying that this is Russian propaganda. This was Russia who organized this specific thing in the West, because what they do is a little bit different. So I think that this is what they cracked, the match in the matrix they cracked, was that they see a problem, a real problem, like farmers in Poland who are dissatisfied. They are dissatisfied for a reason. And for their, whether they're right or not doesn't matter. It's like it's a group that lives in Poland and is entitled to be dissatisfied for some reason. So they see that such sentiments exist, and then they start amplifying them. They amplify. And how do you decouple the reality of the problem from Russia's influence, from Russia amplifying it? So if you label it as Russian propaganda, that's going to be wrong, because that means you are diminishing the problem that it actually exists and you don't want to address it. The very same thing that happened with uncontrolled immigration and so on and so on. It's like there's so many problems out there that Russia amplified, and these problems were later labeled as Russian propaganda, which is completely untrue.
Mm. And
It's
it's an
not.
interesting distinction,
Yeah.
isn't it? Because we, in our partisan differences, we fall into this very easily. So take the figure of someone like Tulsi Gabbard. Now,
Yeah.
immediately, people will see her repeating Russian narratives and they will say she's a Russian asset or agent. That then triggers people on, that side of the aisle, to say this is clearly a false label. Uh, and then everyone's kind of fighting and shouting or whatever. But there's a unit cost of investment, isn't there? If you're going to actually have an agent, That's pretty expensive to invest in an agent, to build an agent up, to service an agent, to keep the secrecy around an agent. But if you can get somebody of an influential position to repeat your disinformation, so that what they're actually pronouncing is misinformation, the unit cost of achieving that is much lower. And then you can create the illusion that you've got an asset or agent at a fraction of the cost. But I think because we're not clear on the mechanics of when disinformation turns into misinformation as opposed to malinformation, and then actual spycraft, we just fall into this trap, and then it works. It's a win-win for Russia because everyone's fighting. It doesn't matter, they've achieved the divide and conquer, which is what that was intended.
Yeah, and this is what I'm gonna add. So what you're saying, there's this a Swedish defense expert on Russia. I forgot his surname. His name is Oscar Johansson or something like that. I'll look him up. So he brought this up, what you're saying, several years ago, saying that Russian propaganda is extremely cost effective precisely for that reason, because to sort of breed an agent, let's call it that way, that's a lot of time, and obviously they get caught at some point. It's a nasty business. And you have this Tulsi Gabbard, because obviously the first time when I heard about it, because I didn't know anything about her, so when I first found out that she was like saying all these things on Twitter about NATO and stuff, I was like, okay, this is not good at all. But then I talked to several people, also Fred Hoffman, perhaps you know him, and he said that, yeah, the risk is there, but it seems like she is also like, she was, she's lieutenant colonel or something like that, so she has a rank, some military rank. She is not completely helpless, lost like Matt Gates, but thank God that dude is out. That one is a serious problem, because I don't think that Tulsi inside, she doesn't come across as a person who's bad, who's malign, unlike Matt. Matt is just, oh my God, poster boy of everything bad. You
As
can
I
read
saw her
about.
on Twitter, it was like you're safer in any bathroom with all the trans people in the world, but are you safe with Trump's cabinet picks? I mean, so many of them have
Well,
rather dodgy accusations
that's
against
a
them.
good one. That's a good one. I appreciate that. But it depends. With Matt, I would say no. The answer is no. You can chill together with Tulsi, I guess, but not with Matt.
Don't go into that unisex bathroom.
Yeah,
Definitely
and
not.
he said, Mr. Hoffman said that, yeah, Tulsi is like that a little bit, but it also depends on who she listens to, so who is around her. So that's why I'm not extremely optimistic or happy, but by Trump's standard, I think the foreign policy picks that he has are good. This is not Tucker Carlson, who was slated to become state secretary. That would be like a total disaster.
Yeah.
But Marco Rubio is a completely sane person. I don't have anything against him at all. I think he's a very good pick.
And
And
Keith Kellogg is quite an interesting character, actually. Some of the things he said are rather, yeah, I mean, they are rather interesting to see how that
I
unfolds.
think, yeah, I think that, we shouldn't expect a lot from them, but these people clearly know what they're talking about. So this is not some random Cash Patel, Jackson Hinkle, Tucker Carlson get together. And it's not that at all. And
Yeah,
I
if you're
think
going
a
to
lot
get
of
Jackson Hinkle as Secretary of Defense, I think that's the point at which everyone starts to
Yeah,
debate
well,
seriously,
Jackson,
right?
yeah, when you see that Jackson Hinkle is dissatisfied about something, that's like, wow, that's music to your ears. Because he had a fight not that long ago with other MAGA, like hardcore MAGA, because some MAGA are sane, and then you have like the completely lost, so to speak, group. Nick Fuentes, something like that, yeah. They had a fight, and it was lovely. I read every tweet. I was like, "Go on, please don't stop." And it was so bad. The offenses were so bad. I was like, I have a lot to learn from these guys, and even though I'm offending them almost on a daily basis, but what I'm trying to say here is that I don't expect a lot from the cabinet, but I think by Trump's standards, it's not bad. And again, I don't know, all this ceasefire talk. Yeah, I think that there will be like a push of some sort for sure, because he promised it, and he can't just say that I'm not going to do it at all. That no, that I don't believe in. But I think that during that negotiations, some new things may arise which will alter the course. I'm not 100% sure, but I can't really see Keith Kellogg saying that, yeah, we're gonna like make this super bad deal, because he understands, like, the situation on the ground. He traveled to Ukraine just to make the case closed. That I also don't really see happening. So I'm just a little bit optimistic, but I don't know. I mean, I'm not gonna say that it's gonna be super great. Either way, for the time being, I just don't know what the alternative is, because even if Kamala Harris were to win, she would do absolutely the same. And you know what's going on the front. It's a catastrophe.
And if you like that short teaser for the full episode, please go over to IWI, the Information Warfare channel, where you can watch the full hour-long conversation with Lesia. And please do make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out on some of the incredible work that other creators are doing on that channel and are posting on a daily basis.